Welcome to episode 23 of the Wake Up podcast. This is a special podcast. That's why I'm doing a little bit of a primer for all the new listeners who I'm sure will be coming across my work for the first time. And my listeners who will be coming across Pete Evans for the first time. So Pete and I met almost a decade ago, maybe not that long, maybe 7-8 years, I can't really remember now specifically, I think it was at the launch of a organic health food store. And it's really interesting how over the years, like we've sort of crossed paths a number of times, and we've converged along this idea of personal responsibility, both in our own paths, because we haven't caught up too many times over the years, but each time, we're sort of on this almost parallel journey, but of our own making. In this episode, we talk about a lot of things, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to weave the topic that if you're familiar with my work, you'll know that I'm a Bitcoin proponent. I'm a fanatic about it because I think it's the most important thing happening in the world today. It is the centerpiece for the separation of money and state. It is the centerpiece for the renaissance of responsibility, which you'll hear me discuss throughout the podcast, because it allows each individual human being to take ownership of their own of themselves and of their wealth and of their economic decision-making capacity. So the issue was we got into so many different topics that we didn't really get to talk about it until the end. And because of the limitation we had on time, I ended up trying to give Pete a primer on Bitcoin, because as far as I understand, Pete's only come across Bitcoin really recently. I mentioned it to him years ago, but his knowledge on it was limited. So it turned into me sort of doing this rant, trying to, it's the old analogy of drinking water through a fire hose, where I try to explain kind of the emergence of money, the history of money, and Bitcoin's place in it and why it's important, all within, 5-10 minutes towards the end. So I just want to give people a primer that it's a broad conversation, and that if this is your first time coming in contact with Bitcoin, I'd love you to have a look at some resources that I'll put in the show notes of this episode that you'll be able to go through at your own leisure. I'm going to talk to Pete about doing a series of episodes as he personally goes through this rabbit hole himself, because I'd really love to open up this topic of discussion, because it touches so many things that I know people who are listeners of Pete's work or followers of Pete's work, or people who are aligned with the ideas that Pete discusses, the idea of Bitcoin or the concept of Bitcoin is going to align very strongly with all of you. So I really want to do it justice, and my little rant at the end of it is just really like the tip of the iceberg for this topic. So again, thank you in advance for listening to this episode. Thank you for trusting me and for trusting Pete, both my listeners and his listeners, about the topics that we're discussing. Pete's one of the most genuine, authentic, loving people that I've ever met, and I really enjoyed the discussion. I look forward to doing subsequent episodes where we both take a journey down this and take you as the listener or the viewer, depending on how you're digesting this conversation, down this rabbit hole, because when you finally are able to own yourself in an economic capacity, you have the power to actually enact change in the world. So thank you again. Hope you enjoy this podcast, and I will see you in a future episode. And we're live with episode 23, I believe, of the Wake Up podcast. And on this episode, I have a special guest with me, someone who I met, now maybe 7-8 years ago, and we sort of have randomly crossed paths a couple times since then. And funny enough, we kind of find ourselves many years on in a place of similar opinions. So ladies and gentlemen, I've got Pete Evans here. I'll let him introduce himself because he'll do a better intro than I will.
G'day everyone. Hey, Alex, thanks for having me on. And interesting,
Absolutely.
number 23. I was looking at Jim Carrey's films the other day, and if you haven't watched number 23, then you're in for a wild ride, that's for sure.
Funny enough, I'm born on the 23rd. It's my lucky number as well. So
Oh,
whatever that means.
interesting. It's an interesting. Have you seen the film?
I haven't. Do you know what? I watched the film probably when it came out. Man, I was a kid, so like I don't think I got it. So I'm gonna add it to my list to watch again.
It's a really challenging film, and I think some of the stuff that Jim Carrey undertakes in his roles is pretty wonderful. When you
Yeah,
can sit back and actually look at the choices that he's made in his film career, it's there's a lot in there. And number 23 is just this anomaly that just really is like whoa, And there's
yeah. Okay.
something in that. I think there's something in that, especially with what's going on in the world at the moment.
Have you seen Donnie Darko? Like that's
Yeah,
old,
great
old.
film.
Is it kind of in the same sort of realm as that, or not really? Because
A little different. I think it's more so about
okay.
I would say, when you can question your own reality, question reality
Hmm. Hmm.
and your place in it. And
Hmm.
I mean, I think 2020 has been a sort of an appetizer of what 2021 is going to bring for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people will question their own reality.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of things that people felt they believed will be completely turned on their head.
Well, I hope for the better. I think I think that touches on a perfect segue into like what I want to discuss today, which is, I mean, reality. That's a as a I don't know if you've read George Orwell's 1984, but he discusses in there this idea of this future uh, society which is draconian in nature, it's authoritarian, and one of the core elements of how that society is brought about is through this, through double speak, through the elimination of vocabulary, which is, very similar to the cancel culture we've seen in 2020, and through like the complete inversion of truth, which is sort of like makes you question reality to the point where you don't actually know what the hell is real anymore and what's fake. And, things like, politicians running around and claiming science of things that are completely unscientific, or health ministers who are 400 pounds overweight telling us what is and isn't healthy. And like, I don't know, I kind of lost so much hope in society and so much hope in humanity this year that it's just been sad to watch. Although at the same time we see this sort of rise of individuals who are willing to take responsibility, think for themselves, which is now an act of terrorism, and actually form an opinion that's based on actual fact and personal responsibility. And it's just wild to see how this whole the world's sort of turned upside down, and we are, I think, have come to a point where reality doesn't really make sense anymore. So I guess what was your journey throughout 2020 like, and what's sort of your comments on that as a theme, as a or as a concept?
Mate, I've had a great year. I think there's a lot of acceleration happening.
Hmm.
2020 seemed to, it's like, okay, here we go down the hill, so to speak, or down the roller
Hmm.
coaster, And for the previous few years, I'd journeyed overseas and experimented in different ceremonial
Hmm.
situations with different plant
Hmm.
medicines and also
Hmm.
animal medicines. So
Hmm.
for me, I was already um, how would you
Prime.
say it? I was exploring consciousness
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
exploring reality and different ways of experiencing the world and myself in that. So when 2020 came and the COVID pandemic reared its head, I was like, okay, this is interesting. Is this a biological weapon? I think a lot of
Hmm.
people in the health space were a little cautious because, as you mentioned, 1984, we know that there's the opportunity for this to be released into the public sphere, into the population. So I think everybody was sort of just like, okay, what is this? Is this serious? Is it a threat? Is it propaganda? Let's just wait and see. And I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks into it that the data started to come out where it didn't make sense. And the health ministers that you talked about that aren't healthy, we're not talking about the immune system, but they were already started talking about vaccines and this, that, and the other, and these crazy notions of social distancing and being locked inside, you know, which just goes against nature. Everything that came out of these politicians and health experts, and I use experts with, you know,
quotes,
because they're not experts. And I actually just did a post prior to hopping on today saying, how could you trust these people with your health? Because they don't have a track record of actually understanding how the body works. You look at them and listen to what they say. It's just, it's basically the opposite of how to stay healthy. And the work that I've done over the years, I created a film with my team called The Magic Pill a few years ago, which ended up on Netflix. I don't know how it did, it went global. But in that, we explore food as one of the powerful tools of long-term sustainable health. And in that adventure, in that journey, we discovered that science can be bought, it can be manipulated, it can be used by certain industries for their own benefit. Whether it be big agriculture, whether it be pharmaceuticals, whether it be whatever it may be. So you can have corrupted science. And we see that more and more. When you actually start to dig down, you understand how this actually plays out. So with 2020 and what was happening, I was like, okay, wow, they're playing their hand here. Why are they playing it now? And over the last 9 months, I've been like, okay, they've accelerated, like to the point of insanity, I would say, because each and every day we are seeing more and more absurdity or insanity or lies being perpetuated through the mainstream media, which is their channel to brainwash people and manipulate people. And it's beyond a joke now. It's beyond ridiculous. Anybody that can't see what this is about is, I've got to use my words carefully here, it will be in denial of their own existence.
Yeah, I think it's a good, like, I call it these days like an intelligence test, you know, or it's a good way to sort of separate, I think, and without sounding too harsh here, it's like sort of, you know, the cattle from the buffaloes, you know, like, so it's, I was on a podcast the other week with a really sharp guy, Eric Keston, he's a philosopher, Bitcoiner, and we sort of talked about this thing where was it buffalo the word that he used? I can't remember. Anyway, it's sort of like whatever the free version of cattle is, right? And it's, you know, we all start this way, and, you know, we're all grazing on our own meadows. Bison, that's the word they use. So we're all these bison, and we sort of get convinced to go into this farm, and, you know, we're given food all the time. You know, we've given these fences that protect us from the dangerous wolves out there. And then there's this holy place that we go to, which is, you know, the place where we move on to somewhere else, you know. And all of us cattle, we think that is, like, you know, the place of freedom, but it's actually the abattoir. And now there's a few of us who are still bison who are like, no, these fences are not protecting us, they're imprisoning us, you know, wake up. And, you know, that over there is not the you know, it's not the temple, you know, it's not the temple of bliss, it's where you go to get killed. And, you know, the cattle are like, no, that's where we go for, like, you know, nirvana. And you're like, no, look what's coming out the other end, it's your brethren, they're being chopped up. And, you know, I think you're like, no, you must be a conspiracy theorist, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. And that analogy to me was like, yeah, wild. It's because it is like that at the moment. It's you know, we are born there was this meme that I saw recently, which you've probably seen it around as well. It's the two photos of a pair of lions, and one lion, he's out in the wild. He's got no guarantee of food. He's got no guarantee of protection. It's dangerous, but he's free. And the other lion, he's in a cage, but he's got regular food. And it's that same sort of. I wrote an article recently, and I call it the divergence between optimizing society for safety versus optimizing society for freedom. And it's a very small shift, but the further down the path of safety we go, whether we can sort of talk about it from a conspiratorial essence is someone sort of attempting to drive that way, which is quite evident at the moment, or not. It doesn't really matter. It gets us to the same point, which is when you optimize society for safety, you build weak humans who give up their personal agency, their personal responsibility. They give it to somebody else or something else to make decisions for them. And what happens is we become like the cattle instead of like the free bison who are able to make decisions for ourselves and able to think for ourselves. But that's a much harder populace or a much harder kind of group of people to control or tell what to do, which is
I love the analogy, and I was thinking about, sorry to bring up films, but I was thinking about the Sausage movie or the Sausage Party movie with Seth Rogen, same thing, the hot dogs, and off to Nevada when they get picked up. It's like, no, you're about to get killed. But also with the bison, when we started going down the health journey, somebody said to me, because what we promote is taking away dairy could be a really good option for you if you choose to. If you have any inflammatory issues in your body, then removing dairy could be a really smart thing to do. But we've been brainwashed to think that dairy is the be all and end all when it comes to calcium and bone health and this. And one of the funniest things I ever read was, you understand that cattle are domesticated, and in the hunter-gatherer times, could you imagine going up to a wild buffalo or a bison
that's trying to milk it
in a herd on their field when they're nomadic, and going up there and saying, I'm just going to squeeze your out of there for a while? It just wouldn't happen. Or a water buffalo for that with the big horns. You aren't getting close to one of those wild animals to take their milk. But domestication of any species makes them more easily controlled, and that's what we're seeing here. And I know what you're saying, that true responsibility and accountability of all our own actions without giving our power away to anybody is the key here. And going back to the journeys that we did over the last few years in ceremonial aspects, going into that is you're going in to work on yourself. You're going in to discover parts of yourself that you will not have any choice but to look at, the dark parts, your fears. And generally through those psychedelic or shamanic journeys, you will go through your own death or be in some very frightening situations. And once you've managed to understand what that is, and understand that the fundamental basis of this adventure of life is you have to rely on yourself. As soon as you give away your power, that's a form of living in fear. So I do believe that what the current energy is over the last 2020 through the mainstream narrative, through the agenda, is to create fear of death, fear of not knowing how to live. Somebody telling you to live inside and not go outside, someone telling you not to visit your family and friends and loved ones, someone telling you your life will not go back to normal until you inject an untested poison, is, I use the word insane. There's no other word for it. Or very intelligent if that is a plan to control people. And it seems to be working for a portion of the population, but at the same time, as you said, we're seeing so many people over the last 10 months that have learnt more about the immune system, virology, viruses, as in, can you catch them? What are they? How does your body react to them? We've seen more and more people understand the political system. You know, some people call it the Great Awakening. And I have to say, over the last year, I've learned more about these topics than I ever have in my previous 46 years on the planet. And I know I'm not alone. So inadvertently, what's happened is this balance. The people that are already living in fear will continue to hand away their power and live in more fear. But the people that are like the bison, you know, that still have that in them, that haven't been domesticated all the way to give away all their power, if they're looking at this, and more and more people over this year have gone, this isn't right, and all of a sudden that's lit a fire in them to discover what else may not be truthful in their reality, whether it be the education that they were brought up in, or the religion they were brought up in, or their parents' belief systems that they adopted or inherited. And now they're questioning everything. And when we can start to question everything, and then at the same time live intuitively and trust our inner guidance or compass, that's when true power really manifests in each and every one of us. Now, when that happens, and then we form a community of like-minded individuals, that, you know, the old saying is never underestimate the power of one individual to change the course of humanity, but never underestimate a collective conscious group of people that are fighting for the same thing. And I do believe it is a fight. And I've shied away from that word for so long because I'm not a fighter as such. But I really do, after looking at this for the last year, it's like, okay, we're going to put our boxing gloves on here, because this actually is, it's a fight for humanity is the way that I see it. It's the fight for the coming generations, because where this is headed, if we only listen to the mainstream narrative, it's not a pretty future for each and every one of us, or our children or our grandchildren, if that is even to be a reality. I shared a video this morning of one of the professors from Oxford University speaking about, and you could call it a slip of the tongue, but he was being interviewed about the new vaccine. And in that interview, he said, you know, we probably won't get to 60 or 70% sterilization of the population. And the interviewer that was like, he tried to interrupt him and he just kept going. But we're watching reality.
This is so weird.
We're watching the agenda expose itself time and time and time and time and time again. It can't not, because the truth will always come out. It'll always come out.
So weird. Before you even said the word sterilization, I wrote a note here, which I was going to ask as my next question to you, which is, I said, literally what I say here is, life is the antithesis to sterilization. So, and I wrote that because the point that I wanted to go down was this idea that the pursuit of safety is the pursuit of sterilization. It's the pursuit of sanitizing the life out of life. Like, and this is the big fallacy that I think a lot of people miss, is that, conspiracy or not, you know, when politics becomes deranged to the point where safety is the number one thing, you end up, it's kind of like the if you've heard of the story of the Nazi prison guards, right? Is in the beginning, they didn't just day one become an army officer, and day two go and start killing Jews. They started by day one becoming and an army officer. Day 2, being asked to transgress their own values just a little bit. These people, they need to be watched. Then, transgressing a little bit more and a little bit more. And what happens is, as we go down this, it's the proverbial slippery slope, right? You start off here, but you end up somewhere in a completely different place, because step by step, you transgress or you move down a path that is divergent, or it's not aligned with natural law or with your own values. So what happens is, you start off as an army officer and end up being a Nazi prison guard. And that was something that most people thought was inconceivable. But here we are today. And I remember in March, I first started speaking out and saying, what the fuck is going on? Lockdowns make no sense. If we're going to be healthy in and amongst any sort of pandemic, people need to be outside in the sun, exercising together. Like that. That's what we need, not staying inside, watching Netflix, putting muzzles on and, decreasing the fucking oxygen to our own brains. And I got seen as a crazy person, and people like, what the fuck are you saying? You're going to kill grandmas? And I was like, no. If these measures are put in place now and mandated, that is a step towards future mandates for other stupidities. And here we are today seeing, step 1 is a voluntary vaccine. Step 2 is, now we're going to, ensure the vaccine is not mandatory, but it's mandatory if you want to fly, if you want to go to the shops, if you want to do this. And then, we're going to do an optional, you can do a tracker to make your life easier, so that, there's a chip with the vaccine so that we know if you're vaccines, but that's not mandatory. And then down the track, well, that will be mandatory if you want to enter this place. So this is like it's the dangerous slippery slope with what people think are small transgressions, but that can compound on themselves and end up in a place where you never thought you would end up, because you didn't take a first principles approach to making decisions. And I think that's what 2020 has been a narrative of, is one step after another down the ugliest path. It's the classic saying of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So one might argue that a lot of people may have had even good intentions along this time, but their stupidity got in the way because they couldn't think 2, 3, 4, 5 steps down of what does a mandate today mean tomorrow, when we optimize for safety instead of personal responsibility.
Well, let's even sort of reverse that and look at the population, say, of Australia, and the health issues that people have. We're not a healthy country. We know that 70% are overweight, obese, and the amount of autoimmune disease, heart problems, or cancer, you name it. It's huge. That's the pandemic. Yet, what are people doing about it? These incremental journey. Oh, I'll just have some takeaway tonight. Oh, I might get some junk food tomorrow. Oh, it's just a cookie from the this, And then it goes on and on and on. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, they raise their children to be the same way, rewarding them with shit. And then all of a sudden they've got cancer, or they've got type 2 diabetes, or they've got, they're huge. And they're like, somebody has to fix me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to the doctor. What can you do? Let's take gastric band surgery, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm going to go see a stranger. They're going to cut me open and take something out of my body. And that is considered normal. Yet looking at the food that somebody eats and following a dietary philosophy is seen extreme and crazy and dangerous. Yet the person that would be doing the dietary philosophies themselves, and they can work it out, what works for them, whether it be more plant-based, more carnivorous, ketogenic, whatever it may be. They become the investigator of their own life, the detective. What works for me? But instead, what is considered normal in this insane world at the moment is going to visit a stranger that you have no idea what that surgeon or anaesthetist has done the day before. What's going through their mind? Were they up all night with their mates getting pissed? Were they on the gear? Were they having a bad day with their partner the day before and they haven't slept properly? And you go in there trusting them with your life, that they know what they're doing, and you haven't looked after your life, saying, fix me. Do you think they care about you like you care about yourself? Some do, probably. But that's considered normal. Cut me, burn me, radiate me, fix me, because I have no power to fix myself. Now,
why do you think it's so hard for people to claim? So, and sorry to cut you off there, but why do you think it's so hard for people to either claim back or adopt an attitude of personal responsibility where they don't look? Why is it so easy for people to look for an authority or an expert to fix them as opposed to taking responsibility? What do you think that spawns from?
Many reasons, but you could look at the educational system as being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Going to school and having a authoritative figure, not being able to think for yourself. You need to rote learn this. We'll give you the information. You're a good person if you can regurgitate it out how we want it. Don't go too far out of the boundaries. Stay in the line. Now, it's one of the things that I've heard so many times over the last 10 years since I've been sharing information. Stay in your lane. You're just a chef.
Yeah.
What do you mean I'm just a chef? Well, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a lover, I'm curious, I'm inquisitive. I love to spend time in nature, so I learn about nature, I learn about relationships, I learn about information and what suits me to learn. I've studied way more about long-term sustainable health than anything that I ever learned at school. I've studied this more so than anything I've learned about cooking.
Mm-hmm.
So when people label somebody as you stay in your lane, that is probably, and I'd like to throw the question back to someone saying, have you got such a limiting outlook on your own life
Yeah.
that you define yourself by your chosen career? Most people choose a career that they don't even fucking like, right? So imagine defining yourself or having your identity as something that you've studied, which has been taught to you from somebody else, may not actually be factually true. Let's take dietitians as an example. What dietitians are taught at the university that they study for 4 years is based on faulty science, a lot of it. They have no idea. They go into classroom and think, oh, I'm going to learn how to help people. I'm going to learn the best of nutritional advice that's scientifically backed. If they were a critical thinker, they would investigate each and every part of that course or lecture and go, where did this come from? Who actually created this course? Who created the Dietetics Association? Who were the founding members of that? And if you dig deep enough, you can find out that it was actually Seventh-day Adventists that had a slant towards vegetarianism, that had ties with agricultural systems or big ag. Now, could you imagine then if you went into that degree going, okay, so this was set up by with a religious ideology, and it was also set up to benefit certain agricultural industries. Okay, well, that maybe I'll look at this course differently. Yet, how many people think like that? If you want to look at the medical system, for instance, same thing.
I
Pharmaceuticals,
think
same thing,
pharmaceuticals is a huge one.
right? But I've interviewed probably over 100 and maybe 120 doctors over the last few years on my podcast. These are the doctors that have expanded their knowledge base. They're usually the doctors that have been ridiculed by their peers. They're usually the ones that have been silenced. They're usually the ones that have had their degrees taken off them or their letters. And they all say the same thing pretty much. And what they say is that we are taught not to be critical thinkers. It's nearly conditioned out of us. And the best doctors, they say, through their trading, are the ones that don't ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, how do we get into this situation? You could look at education as one thing. You can look at your parents and their belief systems as another. Were you taught children should be seen and not heard? Listen to your father, he knows best. Listen to your mother, he knows best. Just go and watch TV. Just go play by yourself. You know,
Yeah.
when we start to really look at this with and ask some serious questions about who am I? How did I get to think like I think? How do I behave like I behave? How do I interact with the reality around me? Then we can dig deep into ourselves. And again, going back to some ceremonial journeys, whether it be meditation, whether it be yoga practices, where we have these revelations, whether it be fasting, like you're going through now, whether it be a ceremonial plant medicine journey or a toad medicine journey, we can go in there with an intention to learn more about ourselves. And in that, we can discover a lot. And we can forgive a lot as well, so it doesn't become an angry experience afterwards where we blame others, because I think blaming is it's a slippery slope when we start to blame others for the predicament that we're in.
Well, blaming is another form of taking responsibility out of yourself and placing it elsewhere. Everything you're talking about, and I just want to pop this note in here and throw it back to you, but is everything comes back to putting the individual at the locus of existence. It's, if the individual cannot take responsibility, and critical thinking is another example of responsibility. Critical thinking is saying that I'm not going to just passively accept this and regurgitate it back out. I'm going to think for myself, and I'm going to take the responsibility to dig into what this information is and see how it applies to me and what I'm trying to do. So like everything you're saying, like literally, a recent piece I wrote, I talked about, the renaissance of responsibility. I think over the last, over the last couple hundred years, there's been an incentive to move away from responsibility because it's been more efficient for the management of large groups, and that had its heyday in the early times, particularly. So if I start to speak historically here, we had the fall of the church and the rise of the nation state. And the rise of the nation state emerged as this solution to how do we protect private property rights? How do we protect individuals so that they can be free, sovereign people? And sovereign is the key word there. But what happened is over time, that whole, the nation state institutionalized and decayed and became, it went from, if I use a Tony Robbins saying, it went from the walls that protect us to the walls that imprison us, and has now become an institution of indoctrination. So, what you spoke about earlier about schools, I really echo that. For the last few years, I'm writing an article at the moment actually called "What Has the Government Done to Our Education?" And I don't call schools schools. I call them state indoctrination systems, because effectively they take you in when you're a kid, when you're most impressionable. They beat they beat your individuality out of you. They beat any critical thinking capacity out of you, and at the end of it, they sort of put you out into society and expect you to, do something as another cog in the wheel, right, or as another, link in the chain. So, and what that does, and I think you were discussing this earlier, is like with dietitians, with doctors, with state police, with all of these things, it creates a moral hazard, which is, you end up, the incentive becomes, your reputation is tied to you perpetuating the shit that you've passively learned and regurgitated, because now it's tied to you. And this is actually one of the things I really admire about you is, I see all the time, people saying shit like, oh, Pete Evans, the disgraced chef. And I'm like, what the fuck? What is disgraced about Pete? Like, the guy has stood up and, has been honest about everything. But, it's maddening how like the media and these Muppets who refuse to think for themselves can sort of represent somebody as disgraced because they decided to take responsibility, because they decided to be outspoken, because they decided to be a critical thinker, because they decided to question what I call fiat authority versus and build their own natural authority, which is, in contrast to that. So I don't know what my original point there was. I started blabbing on about I think responsibility, but it's a, I don't know, I just feel this thread, and I just believe that, the world is bifurcating, and the line in the middle is the line of responsibility. And which side do you want to be on? Do you want to be, part of the ignorant, plentitude who gives up their agency and asks for somebody else to make the decision for them? Or do you want to be a sovereign, free individual? And that comes with its own dangers. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to fuck up, you're going to get hurt, you're going to face death, you're going to face your fear. But that is the definition of being alive, and we vilify all of that stuff today, which is discouraging, to say the least.
Well, I think you just summed it up then. It comes down to a choice. You can choose to continue on the journey. I've got friends and family that rely on the system. They're sick, they rely on pharmaceuticals, they rely on other people to help them out, they rely on the government to pay them, which isn't really the government, it's the people working that pay tax, So,
Exactly.
The first moment I realized there was something wrong with the system was when I was 17 and I started my apprenticeship as a chef, and I was getting paid $3 an hour, but I also needed to live out of home. So it's like, okay, I was earning, and the restaurant I worked in would only allow me to work 40 hours a week, which was bizarre, or 50 hours a week, because they didn't want to pay overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right at the start of my apprenticeship. I think it was the easiest job I ever had. But for me to live out of home, I needed to get a second job. So I got a second job as a waiter, and that was paying 3 times the amount. I was paying $9 something an hour, and I'd do that for 20 hours or 30 hours a week. But I had no idea until I got my first paycheck. My second job was taxed at 50%. So every dollar I earned, I had to pay the government 50 cents in the dollar, because I had a second job.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you're penalizing somebody for having a second job. Now, I was 17. My mates decided not to work. They decided to go on the dole.
Mm-hmm. The
dole was giving them pretty much the same amount of money I was getting for working as an apprentice chef. And they were selling dope at the same time, so they were earning some good money. So they weren't working, they weren't contributing to society, except maybe selling some dope. and they were getting paid. You have somebody out there that wanted to move ahead, that had an entrepreneurial spirit to live out of home and be responsible, be independent. And the harder I worked, the more I got
robbed is the word. Robbed.
Yeah,
it's extortion.
Robbed, but it was like, I'm trying to find the right word. It's not robbed. It was penalized.
Penalized is the word, but I like to use the word robbed because I fundamentally believe taxation is theft, and I'll tell you why I believe that is because if you didn't pay the taxes, Pete, what would happen to you?
Yeah,
you go to jail. So exactly. So basically, you have to pay something, not because you voluntarily want to, but because it's under the threat of violence, and that is the definition of theft. When a robber comes into your house, he doesn't ask you to, give your money over. It's like he comes under the threat of violence. You give your shit over. So this is why I believe taxation is theft. But anyway, I'll let you finish the story here because this is really important because it touches on the next part I want to hit on.
Yeah, so that was as a 17-year-old. I was like, this just makes no sense whatsoever. And I still believe it's like that to this day. Like, so how do kids, young kids, what's the incentive for them to go out there? Because there's people out there that do want to contribute and work and grow and evolve. And then there's a certain percentage of society that would rather just chill out. And I don't judge those people. I didn't judge my mates. So I was like, fuck, you're probably smarter than me doing what you're doing. You're having a good time. I'd come back and I was sharing a house with them at the time. I'd finish work after a 12-hour day. Be like, how was your day? And they'd be sitting around smoking bongs, eating pizza. Be like, oh, we had a great day. Like, how was your day? I'm like, fuck, it was pretty fucking hard, They're like, what are you doing that for? I'm like, well, probably 5 years, 10 years down the track, I don't think I'd want to be doing that because that will keep me in a certain situation that I can't trust. And it's just not me. I want to travel the world. I want to see things. I want to do things. I want to build things. I want to create things. And for me to be able to do that, at the moment, we need some cash to be able to do that. I probably can't travel around the world on the dole,
Yeah. It's one of those conscious decisions, actually. So, I think one of the things that, have you done any sort of reading or study into like libertarian philosophy? Like, the like stateless societies and the ability for human beings to operate and to collaborate without requiring a nation state in the middle. Have you done any digging on that sort of topic?
I haven't, but I know what you mean and where it's headed because I think that's definitely the way forward somehow.
Well, the somehow is actually one of the topics that I want to hit on. So I guess a lot of, there was a lot of noise, particularly around the election this year with the fossil, what's his name, Biden, potentially winning. Let's see what happens there. But I was very much I'm a libertarian in the sense that I don't believe in the requirement for a state to exist in order for human beings to collaborate, because absent the state, people think that we go into some sort of state of complete chaos and what they like to call anarchy in the negative sense, which is, everyone's going to come in and kill each other and there's no rule of law or anything like that, which libertarians are generally what's called like anarcho-capitalists. So they sort of believe in the idea that human beings are very good at governing themselves through the ability to make, logical economic decisions, which is, Pete, you're a good chef, about this and that. I know something else, and we can trade. Now, originally in the early days, and I'm going to try and give a really high level overview of here, sort of like the libertarian principle, but it's, in the early days, like I said, the nation state emerged as an institution to help protect private property rights, which is at the core of human beings and personal responsibility, and it's at the core of natural law. So your first private property is yourself. And that extends to your thoughts, then anything that you mix your time and energy with. So your wealth, your money is your private property. Your the property where you live, your family, your things and stuff. Everything is an extension, but it all sort of emanates from you. And libertarians believe in the idea of the voluntary exchange of private property, and then the ability to also defend that private property being a paramount right. And what happened is over the last couple hundred years, we sort of private property has become secondary to public property, and the ability to defend yourself. For example, this is one thing I still respect about the founding fathers in America is the Second Amendment, and even the First and the Second Amendment, the freedom of speech and the right to protect yourself. They were so forward looking in those sort of in those dictates that they put in the original Constitution, that America managed to prosper because of that. And a lot of people think that a lot of people don't realize America's first 100 years was actually what formed America, not the latter 150 years that we've sort of seen what I believe is the decay of America. But it had so much momentum from the free original libertarian notion of what a society was of free individuals who were able to trade voluntarily, that the momentum that gave America allowed it to come into first place, and then the technological advancement and everything. But coming full circle to the taxation thing is, this year, just watching people argue about politics and about we need more government to make more decisions, we need more government for this. It's like, people are so afraid of taking the responsibility to do things themselves, that the only solution that they seem to be able to come up with is for somebody else to create arbitrary fucking rules, whether it's to do with our health, whether it's to do with who we can see, who we can hang out with, what medicine to take, what to think, what fucking, who's getting bombed and everything like that. They think that all of that stuff should be outsourced to some sort of institution, which is run by experts who have come out of fucking, institution-funded institutions, which in the whole process of this thing, that whole beast, that whole apparatus is being funded by the idiots like you and me who are working two jobs, 24/7, getting taxed double for the second job. And effectively, the whole beast gets funded through two mechanisms: taxation, and which is just straight up theft through coercion. Because if you don't pay your taxes, you're in fucking jail. And the second one is inflation. Is money is printed. This year alone, more money has been printed than practically all the money that's been printed since the beginning of time. And you and I, good little idiots, have to work for our money. We have to trade our finite resources, which is time and energy, for this object, which is, a tool of collaboration. Without money, human beings cannot cooperate because, we live in a subjective reality. So we have to trade our time and energy for money, whilst a couple clowns over here get to print it and get to create out of thin air. And what happens is that devalues what we're working for, whilst enriches them. And it's such a fucked up situation. And I'm adamantly of the belief that the only way we change this thing is not only through taking responsibility for our health, the food we eat, the thoughts we think, but also the money that we have, the wealth that we have. We move outside of the system. We stop participating in theft through taxation. We stop participating in theft through inflation. And there's a mechanism that allows for that, which I'll get into in a moment. But I know I've gone on a rant here, but it's through taxation and inflation that literally all of these stupid things get funded. the social programs that were being taught, the fiat food, the magic pills that we're encouraged to take, like the fact checkers, the social media censorship, all of that is funded through us. We literally fund all of that through taxation and through inflation. And I wonder if you've given that any thought in terms of how do we as human beings fight back, because everything that we seem to do feeds the very beast that keeps us caged.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as I said, I hadn't really thought much about politics until this virus turned up. It was actually 4 and a bit years ago, which actually piqued my interest, was when Donald Trump was running, and it created so much hate amongst people that I thought were decent individuals. There was just that much hate against him when he was running up against Hillary. And I was following people on social media that were apparently spiritual in in their nature, spiritual gurus. And all of a sudden they were jumping on the hatred. I was like, what the fuck's going on here? I said, he's just a guy. Why are you judging somebody on a job that he hasn't done yet? I said, why don't you reserve your judgment for 4 years? If he does win, let him run for 4 years. And if he's not doing a good thing, he won't get re-elected. But he's going for a job that nobody knows whether he'll do a good job or not. So I've been watching it very closely, and I had some words with people as he was running in 2016, some close friends just saying, you guys are getting angry about something. I said, have you looked into Hillary Clinton, for instance? Like, what do you mean? Well, I said, well, you seem to have an opinion about Donald Trump. I said, have you looked into the actions of Hillary Clinton over the last couple of decades? What do you mean? Well, maybe that's a good place for you to look. I'm sure you'll be able to find something in there if you choose to. But just the look on their faces, asking them to question and do their own investigation into somebody because they were happy to attack one thing, but not happy to actually do any investigation into the other thing that they're defending. It's like, oh, this is interesting. You've been brainwashed. And over the last few years, I've been watching what Donald Trump has been doing over in the States and watching the games that are being played. And one thing I keep hearing is we need less government. We need less government. We need less government. We need some sort of system in there, obviously, to build the roads and keep certain things in place. And certain systems need to stay in place. But we definitely need to cut back on the amount of influence that the government has. And it's interesting, since I've been in this space of looking at this and being open to hearing all sides, is that I have been somewhat invited into different groups and different circles and different organizations to look at this and what's happening here in Australia and potential solutions, as you were talking about, into the future, that the systems will either be evolved or dismantled or new ones will be built in a way that helps everybody and not just a select few. So again, I think what's happened in 2020 is it's brought so many people now, not everybody, but a lot more are like, what is going on here? So I think what inadvertently is going to happen, what we're going to see in 2021 and moving forwards, especially in this country, Australia, is it's given an opportunity now for either a new voice or a new collective voice, perhaps a new political party, whether that, and for the people that don't believe in government and politics, what I said to these people when Donald Trump was running in 2016, I said, what if Donald Trump is the catalyst to shake things up? What if you could have the view that instead of just looking at the next 4 years, you actually look 20, 30, 40 years down the track? What if you could expand your view to think Trump is a catalyst for change? Not that he is the answer for what it's going to be like in the future that's going to make us all happy, but what if he breaks the system in such a way or shocks the system that in 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, it creates an opportunity for something new and more evolved to take place or to form. And I think that's what's happened. I honestly believe that's what's going to happen globally with this pandemic. I believe it's now opening up the floodgates for solutions to happen, because just say you believe in the agenda or the elitists or the cabal or whatever it may be, they really should have just, as you mentioned earlier, slowly, have a 100-year plan like the Communist Chinese Party has, have a very long-term plan. But all I see over 2020 is desperation, acceleration, fear, not so much fear from the public, but fear from these systems, the medical system, the pharmaceutical and vaccine system, the banking system, the government system. I see fear and desperation in all of these, and you can expand on that, because the things that they're doing are exposing themselves to a wide group of people. Whereas once upon a time, there was people like yourself and me that were sort of on the, you'd say, conspiratorial side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were probably a very small minority.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, okay, you look at the polls that were, for instance, in mainstream media this year. Will you take them, and do you think a vaccine should be mandatory? And they were putting this out through Channel 9 and mainstream news outlets. It was like 80% believe no, we do not want a mandatory vaccine. So again, inadvertently, by playing these cards very quickly, they're waking up people, or people are waking up themselves. So I'm optimistic about what's coming. It may take a little while to get there.
Yeah, look, it's the Streisand effect, if you're familiar with it. It's the more you try and suppress something, the more it buoys. And I've always said it's like, the state as an institution has sort of like a grasp on all of us. And the harder it squeezes, the more truth slips out of their grasp. And the only solution that they can think of is to grip harder. And, they grip harder, but then more comes out. It's like, and they're sort of stuck. And this is, I actually think, there's a lot of economic reasons as to why 2020 has precipitated as such, and why I think a lot of these so-called agendas were accelerated. I might have to save that for another conversation. But I think I want to touch on one of the points you mentioned, which is Trump as a force for change, and I fundamentally agree with that. So, like I said earlier, I'm a libertarian at heart, so I don't believe in the need for a state to exist, not for roads, not for any of this sort of stuff, because I think private individuals can provide all of those services. And Murray Rothbard, who I think is the most important philosopher of the last 1,000 years, wrote a book called For a New Liberty in the 50s or 60s, which discusses how societies can be built from a completely voluntary libertarian standpoint. But anyway, I was pro-Trump in this thing, because I believe he was a force for fragmentation. And another word for fragmentation is localization. And I think the only way the world can function, the only way for human beings or society to function properly, or with some sort of semblance of freedom, is on a much more local level. So what Trump represented for me, for example, is, we've been moving towards this whole globalist world, over the last, how many years. And, ever since I was young, I still remember globalism is good, sort of being pumped into my head ever since I was a kid. And what people forgot along the way was global trade and the ability for people to communicate globally and everything. That's fine. But globalism as a mechanism to, enforce law and order and government and mandates on an entire populace around the globe is fucking insane, because it 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 diverts so far from nature and so far from reality. Because you and I, Pete, we're different. Everyone is fucking different. You cannot govern large swathes of people uh, under the same rule. Like if this whole American election told us anything, like even if, let's just assume the bullshit was real, that Biden actually got 80 million votes, but let's just assume that half the country wants one thing, half the country wants something else. If there was ever a reason for America to fucking split up back into 50 individual states, that's it. Like, because what, this idea of a state mandating, one group of people having their rights imposed upon another group of people is fucking madness. So I think for me, one of the things I liked about Trump is this: he was a conscious effort to relocalize the world. Trump was one of the first presidents, or one of the first leaders, to say, fuck everyone else. We're going to pull out of the UN. We're going to pull out of the World Economic Forum. We're going to pull out of this. We're going to focus on our own shit. And I think that was an encouraging force, because the world needs to once again get smaller. We need to give a shit about what's happening in our own neighborhood and with our own people, like the people that we know, as opposed to this globalist fucking agenda. Because at a local level, people can voluntarily agree to, do shit together and not do shit together and stuff like that. And if you don't like something in your locale, you can move somewhere else. Whereas if we lived in a one world government, where the fuck else are you going to go? What are you going to go to Mars, the moon? Like, you don't have an option. So the ability to have choice, the ability to have optionality, is dependent upon the world really fragmenting and localizing, and having options, having choice, having, that's going to be the bastion of freedom. And it really is counter to the globalist trend. And I wrote an article recently where I talk about how the fragmentation of the world is going to happen whether we like it or not. Like, we will localize. The question is, do we do it consciously, or does the whole thing collapse on top of us and we become fragmented unconsciously? And the reason I say that is because the larger something gets, the more centrally planned it is, the more fragile it becomes, because it can't adapt. Like life, if we think about how life functions and everything else in nature, is it happens at the edge. It happens in a decentralized fashion. Life is this process of trying, experimenting, do 10 things, 8 things fail, 2 things succeed. Of those 2 things, another 20 things emerge. It's this messy, chaotic process. It's a trial and error process, but it's decentralized in nature. It's not centralized. Whereas you look at how government works and how these crazy bureaucrats and the intelligentsia and the academia and the media want us all to think is, we're all in this together. It's all got to be planned from the center. We're all one. All this bullshit is not true, because it's divergent to how nature functions. Nature functions as a decentralized system, and fragmented, versus this one world government, which is abhorrent to life, is going to fail anyway. And it just really is a question of how conscious we are along the way, and do we help bring it about, or does the human species just become a fucking evolutionary example of something that didn't work, which I hope is not where we end up.
There might be a few of us that survive, mate.
I've got room in my bunker.
Don't take the vaccine. But I mean, they changed the anthem yesterday in Australia to, instead of "For we are young and free," to "We are one and free."
You got to be kidding me, really?
100% yesterday.
Holy shit.
Changed it. We are one
Wow.
and free. Like, whoa, okay, there you go. Instead of young and free. So we're old now.
There you go.
We're old.
There you go. I mean, this is what I call collectivism the cancer. You've got collectivism on one side and you've got individualism on the other side. And people, like, collectivism is the approach of giving up agency to some sort of institutional group or authority to fucking decide for you. versus individualism is on the other side of the spectrum. And with a collective, you end up with weak individuals. With strong individuals, you have naturally emergent collections of individuals. Because what do human beings do? When you're strong as an individual, you go and find fucking friends. You build your own clubs. You build your own groups. You don't have to be told this is the group you must be in and these are the rules. Groups naturally fucking emerge. They have emerged naturally for since the dawn of time. That's what human beings do. We gather around shared values versus what the state wants you to think, which is in the absence of the state, it'll all be chaos because human beings don't have the capacity to decide for themselves. It's complete fucking bullshit. And this is part of the shit that I'm swearing a lot now, but it's part of the crap that we've been fed since we were young, is that without a authority figure, we can't decide for ourselves, which is I think the core of a lot of this problem.
Yeah, and I think it again goes back to the start of this conversation, talking about self-responsibility. What you said Trump is bringing is, again, self-responsibility for that nation or that country, self-responsibility through the foods that we eat, self-responsibility and accountability for the actions that we take, and that we don't rely on other people. We can form communities, connections, relationships that are symbiotic. But at the moment, it doesn't seem to be a symbiotic relationship that we have with the traditional systems that are in place. So I see a lot of these systems changing very rapidly. And I think that, again, I'll just say that to watch it is amusing. I mean, I'll give you the example. My wife and I were watching Graham Hancock last night on an episode of Gaia, and he was talking about that he was asked to do a TED talk years ago, and he was talking about conscious evolution, how to think for oneself, and him and another guy, they both had their TED talks removed. But he had the information 24 hours prior that they were going to remove it. And interestingly enough, I mean, TED is meant to be about ideas to share. And Graham was saying that when they decided to remove his YouTube TED talk, it went viral. So inadvertently, more people became aware of Graham Hancock through the censorship. And this is going back a decade or so. I'm not sure exactly what year it was. And I've just been censored off Facebook last week. We had 1.5 million followers, and they just deplatformed me. And the funny thing is now, the news is writing about me. Well, they've written about me most days this year, but I'm doing posts now on other outlets, and the mainstream media is sharing my posts to their audience, and they're reaching more people than I ever would have on my own shadow banned Facebook page. Last year or a year or two ago, I'd share a post and it would be seen by 500,000 people, sometimes up to 1 million people. COVID happened. I started talking out about the bullshit, and the algorithm or the shadow banning reduced me to maybe 5,000 people out of 1.5 that I could reach on Facebook. So if they were smart, they would have just kept me on there and kept shadow banning me. But now what's happened inadvertently is more and more people are seeing the content that I'm sharing because mainstream media is sharing it to a larger audience. And if they can't see the insanity of that, of what they're actually doing in their desperation and fear of trying to ridicule someone, or TED trying to ridicule Graham Hancock and be in fear, that exposed TED. And Graham Hancock went on to explain who actually pulls the strings for TEDx or TED Talks. And once you start to dig deeper, like we said about the dietitians, or the medical thing, once you dig deep to see who's actually pulling those strings or where it started from, you can see that there's an agenda in place of what they will allow and what they won't allow. So I think it's a fascinating year, or last year was a fascinating year. It's been great to witness. And I think 2021 is just going to, I thought 2020 was the year of exposure for people to see things in a different way. And 2021 will be the year of action. I think we're going to see the dismantling, or we're definitely going to see the corruption unfold in a way that it needs to. And I think if we have this chat in a year's time, and I'd love to have a chat with you in a year's time and see what's transpired over the last year, but I think we are going to have an amazing year once again in so many different ways. But I think for a lot of people, a lot of these old systems, I think they're going to be in a world of pain.
Indeed, indeed. I think that brings us to a good segue to wrap this up then. Can I ask one question? So I did want to introduce you, and I know we bumped into the airport, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago, I think, randomly we bumped into each other at like Gold Coast Airport. I remember walking out, I was like,
that's right.
Hey, what the hell are you doing here? Yeah, it's so funny. And I asked you back then, I think, if you had heard of Bitcoin or anything at the time. And I remember you looking at me strangely, kind of saying no. Did you ever do any digging or anything since then?
I haven't, but only in the last 2 weeks that I have.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah,
tell me what's come up. I'm curious, because I really want to open this rabbit hole for you, like, because this is a profound. I think the most important thing happening in the world today, beyond everything else, and I hope you appreciate that I don't say this lightly, because I'm quite well read and I'm quite across a few things, but the most important thing happening in the world today is the emergence of a non-state money, like, and Bitcoin is that. But I'm really curious to hear what you've sort of discovered so far. This will be the last thing we hit on.
Yeah, I interviewed a fellow about 3 weeks ago called Alan Stevo. He's from San Francisco, and he wrote a book recently about basically a legal way for you to be able to not wear a mask if you choose to. And I think his book was like everything you need to know about masks in 10 minutes, right? And the outline of it was, if you don't want to wear a mask in a mandated area, this is how you can get away with not wearing one legally. So awesome. What a brilliant guy. So I thought, I want to interview that guy. And then when I was having a look at what he's done over the past, he has been involved in consulting for cryptocurrency. So I spent half of the podcast talking about the masks and his creative outlet as a writer and why he thinks it's so important for people to know their legal rights. And then the second half was about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, for instance. And it was really interesting. And after that, I was like, okay, well, maybe the time's right for me to investigate this, invest some money, and, off we go. And I'm fascinated by it. I don't know too much about it, and I feel like 2021 is going to be the time where I will investigate it further and try to understand the future of where this is going and why it has called me, because it has called me. And
Pete, I wanna help guide you down this rabbit hole. Honestly, like I say this hand on heart, like for me, I have found the thing that I'm willing to live and die for. Like for me, I call Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin. So like a lot of the cryptocurrencies, well, not a lot of them, every single cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin is just another representation of, the state, or it's just a fucking bullshit fiat Ponzi game. So Bitcoin stands alone as something that exists outside of the state, outside of any single individual's control or any group's control. Like it is. If you've got, can we riff on this for 10 minutes? Because I want to sort of take you down the philosophical level. So have you heard of the term fiat money?
Yes, I have. Okay.
So what does fiat money mean to you?
It's a system that we're currently in, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So like the word fiat. Yeah, sorry, go on. Like I described.
No, you go.
Yeah, okay. So the word fiat means by decree. So it means that it's, said by somebody or some authority. So, a lot of us in the Bitcoin space, we're all sort of like, if you look at the Bitcoin space, there's, we've all been called, conspiracy theorists, there's all of us are like sort of carnivore or paleo, we all sort of question government, question all this sort of stuff. So it's really interesting how, people who are in the Bitcoin space are really converge around personal responsibility, like big names that, when it comes to philosophers that we, read into are people like, your Jordan Petersons and your Murray Rothbards and all this sort of people. So one of the terms that gets thrown around a lot is this idea of fiat and how it is the antithesis to everything that's natural in life. So you look at fiat money is where the word originally came from, is money that is told it has value because some authority, which is the state or the central bank, has told us that. But if you look at how money emerged over time, a lot of people, and this is where I implore you, when you're starting to do your digging on the rabbit hole here, start with understanding what money is or why money exists. In fact, while we're on this topic, how would you define money? What would you describe money as, or how would you personally define it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I read a book years ago about salt and how salt came from the word salary, or salary came from the word salt, I should say. And that was the thing that was the most important item on the planet pretty much for survival, because you could preserve your food with it. So it's like, this is pretty good stuff. You can do a lot with salt. And then I think the spice trade happened, and then the next thing it turned into precious metals, or maybe that was before that. I'm not an expert on this, so
okay,
I'm not
cool.
an expert on many things. So
I'll give you a brief little dive into then the history of money. So if you look at what human beings do, we collaborate and we cooperate. I don't know if you've heard of this concept of the Dunbar's number, which is kind of the maximum number of. So Yuval Harari, who's an anthropologist, he kind of popularized this notion, but it came from originally an anthropologist called Robin Dunbar, who was a UK guy. And what he found was primates and all the way through to human beings were only able to build meaningful relationships with about 150 people. On it's a biological cap. So what human beings did, the way we've been able to transcend that cap, is we've created mechanisms for social collaboration, and those mechanisms are everything from religion to laws to corporations to monarchies to whatever you can think of, clubs, social gatherings, whatever. We create these abstractions which aren't necessarily real, but they allow us to collaborate or cooperate with somebody that we may or may not know. So like, the fact that you're an Aussie, we have this abstract idea of nationality that will allow us to potentially not be violent amongst each other. So human beings have created this all throughout time, and we've created more sophisticated versions of these abstractions. But the one abstraction, call it an abstraction, whatever you want, that's been with us from the beginning of time is money. Because and what I like to call money is kind of like a language that transcends words. And what it is you perform some sort of action, some sort of work in life. That could be, hunting food, cooking the fucking food in your case, like whatever the thing might be. I perform another function. And in order for you and I to collaborate or to trade, we would need to measure the subjective value of what we both do and exchange our stuff. Now, a lot of people think that money started off as barter. I'm sure you've heard of the term barter, which is, I've got a banana, you have a fucking apple, and we want to trade. That's actually false, because money was this abstraction or this tool that allowed human complexity to continue. It allowed society to get more complex. Barter does not allow society to get complex. If I have an apple and you have a banana, but I want a fucking shoe, you're going to have to find somebody who wants a banana that has a shoe that's willing to trade you so that we can trade. And you can see already how quickly it gets difficult, because then when you add a fourth person who might want something else, so it doesn't work. So money actually started off as promises. You would perform an act, I would perform an act. We would keep a promise. You know, I picked 10 berries today, you killed one beast. You know, we're able to keep a ledger of all of these things. Over time, then we realized that, you know, that ledger that's been drawn in the cave, you know, wasn't very functional. We needed to have an object that represented these dashes of what we each did. And that's where things like salt, spices, cattle, all these objects emerged as the original money that they call it commodity money. And then we found better objects to better represent our time and our labor, because that's effectively what money is. Like, if you think about money at its very, very core, it's our labor, it's our time and energy in crystallized form. If you've input value into society and other people, you know, want that value, we need a way for us to crystallize that value so that in a future time, somebody might trade you something that they've added value into society for with you. So money, I call it like the fabric of society. You can't have society, you can't have collaboration, you can't have cooperation amongst human beings without money. And the only thing that changes is the form of money. And the form of money got better and better over time until we all converged onto a thing called gold. And the reason we converged on gold, because it had a couple really good attributes. It was portable, it was relatively divisible, it was recognizable, it was durable. That was really important, because salt, for example, didn't last as money because it wasn't durable. Imagine working all your life and you have a bucket of salt and then someone accidentally spilt water on your salt. There goes all your wealth, you know. So it wasn't really useful as money. So gold ended up converging to become this, you know, this apex money. And then what we did as human beings, we thought, all right, well, it's not very divisible and it's not very portable, because if you want to carry a large amount of wealth with you, you have to carry all this gold. And, you know, there's a risk of, you know, it being confiscated, taken from you or something. So we created paper, which was these promissory notes that represented the gold. And this is where the advent of paper money and banking sort of emerged. Now, if you fast forward, you know, the last 500 years in particular, and we've had multiple hyperinflations, is the paper was supposed to represent how much gold was in the bank. But what happened was a couple geniuses worked out along the way that, hey, no one's actually checking what's in here. So we can just create more paper and it doesn't really represent how much actual wealth there is. And what that does is it confuses what wealth actually is. Wealth is the increased production of humans. Money is supposed to represent wealth. But when you can print money and it doesn't map to the increased production or the increased productive capacity of human beings in society, the value of the money falls. And this is what we're seeing today. So we've seen this multiple times. We've seen it in Argentina, if you've heard of hyperinflation. We saw it in Zimbabwe. We saw it in the Weimar Republic in Germany. And we're seeing it now with the absolutely unhinged printing of money. Like, when you look at the stock market going up, real estate going up, all these assets going up, it's not the assets going up in price. It's actually the value of money falling in price, because no person in their right mind wants to hold on to money. We are disincentivized from storing the product of our labor, and we are incentivized to either consume to spend it, or we're incentivized to chase blind fucking investments in this, you know, this idea that we should all be investing our money instead of saving it. And this is, again, it's abhorrent to nature. It's abhorrent to how we've evolved as human beings, because it's no longer we no longer have the ability to work today to save the product of our labor today for a future time when we would like to exchange it. Our wealth is being devalued right before our very eyes, but because it's done incrementally, you know, a couple percent every year, we don't think about it. And this right here is what I believe is at the center of all the derangement in society today, is because we're incentivized to consume, we're incentivized to spend, we're incentivized to fund this system, I call it the state, which is just a larger definition of central planning, central government, the schools and all this sort of shit. And what they do is they use the fact that it's called the Cantillon effect, the fact that they're closer to the money printer to enrich themselves, and they are able to pay for everything, like these stupid programs, like paying for Monsanto, paying for all this crap at the expense of us. And they then also reinforce it through taxation. But taxation is really the smaller problem. Inflation and the ability to print money is the larger problem. And this is one really long way. And I think this is going to require like probably a series of podcasts as you're going down the rabbit hole yourself. But Bitcoin stands in the way of that. Bitcoin is a form of money that sits completely outside of government control. It's fixed in supply. It's unconfiscatable. It's uncensorable, meaning that if I want to send you some Bitcoin, if I want to send you money for, like, I want to pay you for any service or good, there is no power on the planet that can stop that payment. At the moment, like, for example, if you want to send dollars from your country to, let's say, WikiLeaks was a perfect example. If you remember WikiLeaks, like, they got banned by Visa, by MasterCard, it was banned through politics. So then, what did WikiLeaks do? And this was Bitcoin's first time that it skyrocketed, was WikiLeaks accepted Bitcoin as a form of payment because Bitcoin is uncensorable. So it's this new thing that's emerged. And another little thing, a little tidbit I'll throw in there is the founder of Bitcoin is completely anonymous and had disappeared 3 years after he introduced Bitcoin in 2008. And it's become part of the Bitcoin mythology, is that you have this thing that's emerged that is unstoppable, uncensorable, uninflatable, and that cannot be turned off and has no head of the snake to cut off. And it's become kind of what I like to think of as the lightning rod for the renaissance of responsibility, which we discussed earlier, because it allows people to take their wealth, which is their first removed piece of private property, and take ownership of it without the ability of anybody to take it, to tax it, to inflate it away, to confiscate it, or to be able to, by force, remove it from you. And it's such it is the most powerful form of reclamation of personal responsibility today, other than choosing to fucking think for yourself. So anyway, it's a long way of me saying I would love to help take you down this rabbit hole. It's such a powerful area of study, and it touches on so many of the things that you've already uncovered on your journey through psychedelics, through plant medicines, through food as thy medicine, through thinking for yourself. All of these things kind of operate in and around the Bitcoin ecosystem. So anyway, I don't know if you've got any comments on that, but or if you've got any questions after that rant, but it's a powerful subject.
I appreciate the education, mate. I'm always open to hearing more stuff. So, and I really appreciate you looking out for us as well.
Absolutely, man. All right, buddy. Look, thank you again for coming on. Can you just tell the listeners where they can follow you and where they can find more of your stuff?
Sure. I'm still on social media on Instagram, Chef Pete Evans, or you can go to my website, peteevans.com. And we also have a new subscription-based website out there called evolvenetwork.tv. So that's evolvenetwork.tv. So we launched that a few months ago, and that has meal plans, recipes. It has my documentaries on there, The Magic Pill and The Magic Plant. Magic Plant talks about cannabis. Lots of different small documentaries that I've made on different plant medicines and different modalities for long-term sustainable health. And we also feature other films such as Dr. Andrew Wakefield's film Vaxxed and 1986 The Act, as well as 200 podcasts and video podcasts and a whole lot more information. So check it out. It's $100 a year, $10 a month, or whatever that converts to with Bitcoin. So I might have to put a Bitcoin thing on there.
Dude, you should. I would love to help you in that process, man, because that means anybody anywhere in the world can just pay you without any fees, without any rigmarole, without any permission. It's like, it's them to you, no man in the middle.
Fantastic.
Powerful stuff.
All right, brother.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and enjoy 2021. Thanks, Aleks.
Pete, thanks, buddy.